ever a time that the tenets of this fraternity have been needed in history, it's got to be today. I really want to talk tonight to those of you who are not members of this fraternity. You'll hear references to things like a trestle board, and if you don't know what that is, the trestle board is the architect's board in which he lays out the work for the day that the workmen are to carry out. And anybody who's been in the construction business knows what a trestle board is and the modern version of it. But the idea of having you men in here who are friends and not members of the craft, that's something very new, because the old system, and by old I mean literally for centuries, right up until the most recent decade, the old century was that you never asked anyone to join. Now, why was it secret? My best determination, at least from my background as a former professor, as far as I can see, the ancient base of the Masonic degree, Master Mason, was in a sense an engineering degree, so that you were either an apprentice or a journeyman or a master, and that's still true in the AFL and the trades today. We still use those designations. But you see, you didn't have the ability to chase credential. So when somebody's traveling in a foreign land and they step in and say, I'm a fellow craft or I'm a master mason, well, they need to get some proof before you let him take over charge of building either a particular arch over a doorway or a part of a building. And that's why they had these secret do-guards and signs and secret words, and could sit down with them and decide, had they really learned those lessons? Were they really given to them? And that's the reason it was passed on, and I really think it was a form of credential that allowed people of the trades, particularly when cathedrals were being built all over Europe, it gave them the ability to travel and be able to prove that they were what they said they were. Because if you don't have your credential, you're dead in the water. And even in modern times that's true if you can't come up with it. But that was the basis of it, and I think that's the reason for all of these old techniques. Now the question is, why don't we get rid of them? Because I think there is a value in history and historical repetition. There was for me. And when I first started, one of my degrees, I can't remember which one, was on February 22nd, Washington's birthday. But it was so important to me as a young history scholar that I realized I was now going through exactly the same process as was gone through by George Washington himself at one point when he was raised and eventually became a Master Mason before our American Revolution. And that was important to me to know that I was walking the exact same steps and using approximately the same wording and getting the same kind of learning and teaching as the founding father of our country. Now, the actual stonemasons, these are the people who built all those cathedrals prior to 1700. And they weren't built at one time. If you go to Westminster Abbey, they'll show you the oldest part, 1069, and then every century or so things got added. The same thing is true if you get to the cathedrals in any part of the world. You'll find out when these things were done. But think of all the craftsmen who created that work and their ability, and that they had formed this kind of union, if you will, a kind of guild and a kind of fraternal organization. But all of them were operative, actual stone masons, people who could take stone, shape it properly, and put it in and make it work, and structurally and architecturally it was proper. Now, what happened is, from 1700, we see the end of that period in history. And quite frankly, there are no more great cathedrals being built. Men who were Freemasons, I'll tell you what they were. That meant that they were not tied by indenture or any other thing to some bishop or some cardinal or some prince or some king. They were free. They were free to offer their services to whoever was doing building. And you see, as the cathedrals start reducing in number, these people have got to get on the move to go chasing jobs in order to get employment at the level that they want to be paid, and those were the highest paid craftsmen of the time. They were the Freemasons. And as these lodges began to shrink, it was then that they finally decided, with a decline in the number of craftsmen, and young men were not coming in, And that's when they decided to take in and accept some men of goodwill, and particularly men of status and stature, including the royalty, the people who were in Parliament, for example, in Britain, and elsewhere on the European continent. And that's why today you have the term free and accepted Masons. The free and accepted now are the builders of a different kind of temple. We're not talking about building physical buildings anymore. We're talking about this temple that I'm standing in right here now in front of you, and the one that you're sitting in as you sit out there in front of me. And that's not a new metaphor, that notion that this is the image of God, and it is how we use it, how we share, how we give, how we love one another. And when I think of all those children that the Shrine Hospitals help, that's an act of God, in my opinion. When I think of what's happening now with dyslexic youngsters and what Scottish Rite is doing there, including right in this building with one learning center and another in Madison, and there are now rapidly being built all over the country. What a marvelous thing for this fraternity to be able to do. And it used to do that without ever telling anyone. Well, on that basis, we became a social society, and all the stonemasons' tools, whether it has to do with living by the square or on a level. You all know what a level is? Well, you live on the level. All Masons are on the level when they're in a lodge. Maybe not quite all. My brother Woods was in a Masonic club in the Philippines, and after the island was fairly secure, they had a visit from Brother Douglas MacArthur. And he gave them all a speech with his 5 stars up here on the collar about how in this lodge there is no rank and there are no titles. We are all brothers on the level. But my brother said nobody really went up and said, "Doug, old boy, how are you?" and put an arm around it. It is true that we do live by the square, and the square is a major tool of the stonemason. We live on the level, we hope. And we know that on that trestle board is the work that's cut out for us for whatever years we've got left ahead of us. There is no religious requirement in this fraternity except one. You cannot be an atheist. And the logic of that is that if you take an oath to whoever your God is, in whatever form you hold God and your beliefs, if you have no such belief that there's any power beyond you in the world, then your oath is no good. You can change it tomorrow. That was the basis of it. And it makes good logical sense to me. But as I look at what's happening now with Muslims and Christians and Jews at each other's throat and about to engage, I think, in a major problem and battle coming up, if there was ever a time that that whole concept of tolerance and diversity, and this nation embodies that concept more than any other nation on the face of the earth. Now, where did this nation get it? I'll tell you flat out, there's no question in my mind, it came out of this fraternity, because you cannot separate the history of America from the history of Freemasonry in America. They are one and the same, and let me just point that out to you. And by the way, it happens internationally. There have been 6, in my opinion, 6 great true revolutions in the 17th and 18th century. What do I mean by a great and true revolution? A revolution that was not aimed at taking power. It was a revolution aimed at giving power to the people. And there were only 6 of those. One was obviously here in America. One was in France. One was in Italy. One was in Hungary. One was in South America. And one was in Mexico. Now, who were the leaders of those 6 great revolutions that brought power to the common people? Obviously, George Washington in this one, and in France it was Danton, in Italy it was Garibaldi, and in South America was Simón Bolívar, Mexico, Benito Juárez, and in Hungary, Kossuth. All of those men, Freemasons, all of them.